Alright, so today is Saturday, December 7th, 2019. I'm standing here at the intersection of College and Dundas streets in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I've got my bike here, which has an action camera mounted on the front, and in this video I'm going to be riding my bike along College Street and narrating along the way. Alright, so I'm beginning my journey for this very short little section of College here, which extends from Lansdowne to Dundas Street. So we've got a little traffic light here at Lansdowne, and then we'll be crossing that and continuing along College Street all the way to Yonge Street, which is actually where College Street ends. So I'm starting at one end of College Street and riding all the way to the other end of it. It's interesting how College Street and Dundas Street actually intersect, because in more of the downtown portion, for the majority of College Street, you kind of think of College and Dundas being two streets which run parallel to one another, but both Dundas and College Street aren't exactly perfectly straight. They curve a little bit, much more so with respect to Dundas. So they actually end up crisscrossing. So this area that I'm starting through riding here is called Brockton Village. It actually was a former, I guess, suburb or sort of borough of the very old city of Toronto. It was annexed sometime in the very late 1800s. I'm just going to try and beat this traffic light here. Most of our crosswalks in Toronto have numerical countdown timers. So if you're coming up to one, you can see that you've got, a certain number of seconds left. It's tempting to, try and beat that timer. As you can see, College Street is a street which has streetcars on it. I'm just riding right along beside where one of those streetcar tracks is. The bike that I'm riding right now has fairly fat tires, which is good for streets like this with streetcar tracks because narrower tires have a tendency of getting caught inside streetcar tracks. But you still got to be careful of them because they're very slippery, and even with these fat tires, if you're not paying attention, you could, end up getting your tire not perfectly stuck in there, but you could be starting to turn and your tire sort of gets caught on it. So that's definitely something that you got to be aware of when you're riding in Toronto on streets which have streetcar tracks. That's a hazard that doesn't exist in every city in the world, and a lot of smaller towns, even surrounding Toronto, most of them don't have LRTs or streetcars or anything like that. So we're just waiting now to cross Dufferin Street, which I mentioned. Brockton was annexed to Toronto. The city limits of Toronto before then was Dufferin Street, so this is as far west as the city of Toronto originally went back in the 1800s. And this portion of the street here is part of Little Portugal. Not necessarily right here on Dundas. There's not a whole lot of businesses around on this portion of. There's a few, but there's not an awful lot of businesses on this portion of College Street. But this area, this neighborhood, is at least is known as Little Portugal, but particularly more kind of south of here. You'll see that this is one of the first curves that we're sort of doing here on College Street. I mentioned, just like Dundas, it's not a perfectly straight street. The reason for this curve here is because, so College Street was kind of an afterthought of the grid, of Toronto. It's a major arterial, but it wasn't part of the original kind of master plan. When this was all farmland, this would have been right down the middle of somebody's field, and the property lines weren't necessarily in line with where the streets are now. So the street actually had to curve to go around this person's property, or this, I guess it was an estate or something like that occupied it. And if they had made College Street go straight, it would have kind of made a portion of their property kind of very narrow and unusable if they had sort of segregated it like that. So I'm gonna kind of sneak past some of these cars here. You have to be very careful when you're doing this sort of thing because right now I'm riding in what's known as the dooring zone, which means that if any of these vehicles on my right or on my left were to open their doors, I would run into them. Now it is, according to the laws of the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, it is actually the driver's and the passenger's responsibility to check before they open a door, but if I crash into their door, it would, hurt me a lot more than it would probably hurt them. So if you're going to do that sort of thing like I was just doing, you want to do it so you're riding, quite slow, not fast. And be ready with your fingers on the brakes so you can stop right away. And even just kind of scanning inside the cars to see if there's passengers in there, and just sort of anticipating that you might need to suddenly stop. So the traffic on this street right now, at least, is going, relatively slow, and I feel comfortable just riding down the middle of the lane here. There are other vehicles behind me, but the ones ahead of me aren't really riding particularly fast. All right, I'm going to do that again here. I'm just going to sneak out through. I don't think I'm going to make this traffic light here, though. You can see it counting down. It's at 3 now, so yeah, definitely not going to make it, although that other cyclist who was ahead of me did make it. This is now Ossington Avenue that I'm crossing. So College Street does not have a bike lane on it, at least for this portion it doesn't. It does eventually have one, which we'll see a little bit further along. This portion does, however, have what's called a sharrow, or sharrows, which are these little bike symbols with an arrow, which shows where bikes are supposed to go. Now those sharrows right now are covered up by parked cars because there's parking allowed in that region, so it's kind of a shared space between, what would normally be where bikes and cars would be driving, and then during off peaks, it's a place where people can park. I think I'm not entirely sure, but I believe during rush hour that no one's allowed to park there, so that this street can carry more vehicle capacity for people commuting to get downtown. So we're now just about to cross Shaw Street, which is just a very small neighborhood street, but it's very well known to cyclists because it's a very common cycling route because it has a contraflow bike lane on it, which pretty much stretches all the way through the downtown core. So I use it very frequently, and so do most other cyclists that I know, for getting north-south if they're going to a lot of destinations down near the waterfront, or of course if they live down there and they're coming uptown for something else. You'll see up ahead, we're now at Crawford Street, and you'll see that here again, College Street curves, and this time we're curving a little bit towards the south. I should mention we are riding in generally the west direction, but there is a small south heading, and this curve, however, unlike that last one that I was discussing before, the curve here is here for a different reason, and the reason for that is because, again, back in the 1800s and earlier, there's actually a creek and a ravine which passed through this downtown, this portion of the downtown core. And essentially, if College Street were to have just gone straight, it would have sort of had to diagonally cross that ravine, which would have been, really expensive to build a really, really long bridge to cross it. So the College Street was built to sort of go around the ravine, so it could, I'm guessing, cross it at sort of a T-junction instead. Now, of course, if you know this area, you'll know that there's no ravine there. There's no, it's a relatively flat area, and that's because they eventually diverted that creek into the sewer system and filled that ravine in. So, I think, as I'm able to smell very clearly right now, we're in Little Italy. So this area of College Street is part of Little Italy, which has lots of great restaurants. and lots of other little shops and businesses. All right, so here's where the bike lane on College Street begins, and that's because College Street from here on is much wider than it was for that last portion. And again, it all kind of goes back to how the street was built. This part here was built a lot earlier than the part I was just riding on. In fact, the road, if we're doing this as a history tour, we're kind of doing it in reverse order, because College Street started at Yonge and it was gradually over the years expanded in the west direction until it terminates at Dundas, where there's a railroad crossing, which I guess is probably the main reason why that's where they finally decided to stop it. So you'll see that the roads are, you know, kind of slushy and snowy and stuff, and part of the problem with that is that when vehicles are trying to park in their parking spaces, they're covered in snow, so they're not really able to park all the way out to the curb, and they're kind of hanging out and covering up part of the bike lane, making that dooring problem that I was talking about earlier even worse. So when I ride through a bike lane like this, I always ride right on the line as opposed to in the actual lane, because it gets me away from those car doors. Alright, so we're just about at Bathory Street, but I'm not going to make this traffic light. So we're now, you know, fully through Little Italy, and this area here to the north is called Brockton Village. And so yeah, the bike lane on College Street extends from here all the way to Bay Street, not quite all the way to Yonge Street. So yeah, we've gotten a fair bit of snow since the last video that I made. I posted a video when I rode on the waterfront trail heading from Etobicoke to, hang on a sec, I'm just getting a phone call here. Yeah, so like I was saying, 2 weeks ago from today I made a video where I rode on the waterfront trail, and that point had been after it had snowed, and then it had all melted away and rained, and all the trails and everything were clean, so I felt comfortable riding my recumbent bike on the roads, but it's then since snowed again. Back on, I guess last Sunday is when it snowed again, and of course it's actually snowed a bit more yesterday too, and it just kind of stuck around. So I haven't been riding my recumbent bike, not really because I'm afraid of slipping and falling on it. It's really just because I don't like getting salt on my bike. Here in Toronto they use a lot of road salts on the road, and of course that really shortens the life of a lot of things that are made of metal. The salt, you know, increases the oxidization and the rust and things from you know, different materials. So I don't like to get any salt on my recumbent bike. So today I'm riding my old green machine bike, which I do still have, of course, and I ride that from time to time. Of course, we've got another red light here, and that's a good point to point out. If I were to turn to the right here, well, of course I couldn't because it's a one-way street, but over there that is what's called Kensington Market, which is a popular Toronto destination. Just a small, really just residential neighborhood that's sort of been converted into a lot of small businesses, and they have a event in the summer where one Sunday every month they have pedestrian Sundays where they close it to traffic so that only people are able to walk around, and they put on different events and things. So yeah, I do still ride my green machine, really just in the winter, just for those situations when I want to be able to ride and not get salt on my recumbent bike. I don't find this bike particularly comfortable, certainly nowhere as comfortable as my recumbents, but it's useful for doing little, you know, small little trips. Alright, so we're now approaching Spadina Avenue, which I've actually made a video in the past showing riding all the way from St. Clair in Spadina all the way down to the waterfront along Spadina. So I've given a tour of Spadina in the past. If we were to turn to the right here and head south, we will be riding through Toronto's main Chinatown, which again, if you want to see that, I'll provide a link to that previous video that I've made. You can see that Spadina has streetcars on it as well. Those are what I consider the new Toronto streetcars. I guess they are the new Toronto streetcars. There's nothing newer than those ones. You almost don't see, you hardly ever see the older style ones anymore. They seem to have replaced almost all of them, or at least on the routes that I frequently am going past. All right, so now there's a vehicle blocking the bike lane and also facing the wrong way, which I know in other countries you're allowed to park like that, but in Toronto you're most definitely not. All right, we're just approaching Huron Street now. So as I mentioned, I'm using my Green Machine bike today, and this is actually the first time I've filmed a video using my newer Yi 4K Plus camera with this bike, and I actually had to make a new mount for it. So I'll just show you a photo of what that looks like. So we're just crossing St. George Street, and if you're going to go north here, this road we're crossing is called St. George Street. If we're going to go to south, it's called Beverly Street. And that's a very common cycling route. I use that at least once a week, I'm sure, for running errands and doing things downtown. And to my left, pretty much since Spadina, pretty much everything to my left is part of the University of Toronto, which is Toronto's main university, I guess, or one of Toronto's universities. If we were to turn right here, though, if we were to turn right here, we would see another Toronto university. This one is called OCAD University. OCAD stands for Ontario College of Art and Design, and they tacked university onto the end of that when it became an accredited university. And the name of the road that we're on right now, which is called College Street, that's actually named after King's College, which is one of the original names for the colleges that made up the University of Toronto, which is the university that's on our left, not the one that we passed there on our that we would have seen if we had gone right. So we're now approaching University Avenue, and this is the intersection of where colleges and universities intersect. Kind of hard to see it from behind the streetcar, but over on our left is the Ontario Legislature building, which is in Queen's Park. Maybe I'll just I can't really do it right now, but if you want to know what Queen's Park looks like, you can Google it. It's an old building, which is where the main government of Ontario meets. Over on our right, this old looking building is the Mars Discovery District, or this area I guess is called the Mars Discovery District. Mars Discovery has lots of buildings in this area. They're a research organization, which I believe originally specialized in medical research. That's what the M, medical and research something, it stands for. So we're now at Elizabeth Street here. So you can see I'm getting a lot of red lights. There are a lot of traffic lights along this route here. And just like before, you can see that the bike lane here, because of the snow, a good chunk of it is occupied by a snowbank, which makes it a little bit less safe for cycling. And of course there's also meltwater when those snowbanks melt that sort of pools and freezes, and you've got, you know, a little skating rink you got to ride over. This is Bay Street here, and technically if you were to continue riding on sort of the bike route that connects up with College Street, you're actually supposed to turn left there and connect up with I believe Gerrard Street, which crosses Yonge and continues in the other direction. But if we're to continue along here, you can see there's no more bike lanes. This building that's over on our right, you see that says College Park. That's was originally a department store, the Eaton's department store, their College Street location. But that's no longer, when they built the Eaton Center, they closed the department store here. But I've now arrived here at Yonge and College, which is where I said I would end my tour. Of course, this is where the College Street subway station is, which is just up ahead on the left side. Alright, so as I said, here I've arrived at the intersection of College and Yonge Street in Toronto. If I were to continue riding east in that direction there, the road actually changes names and becomes Carlton. So this truly is the end of College Street. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed joining me on this narrated tour. I'll look forward to reading your comments in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.